now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Hi, brothers and sisters. Good to talk with you again. Welcome to a program a segment we call It's Time. And what is it time for? Why, it's time for you to get paid. It's time for reparations. It's time to set things right. It's time for a just balance. It's time for equity. It's time for equality. It's time for justice. Let's read our scriptures and get right into our commentary. In the Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning at verse 14, this is what it says. Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or thy strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At his day, that means when he get through working, thou shalt give him his what? His hire. That means pay the person. Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for they are poor. Scripture says, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. I substitute the word they because we got men and women working, and we all got to get paid. I wish I could get an amen on that one. In the book of James, in the New Testament, James chapter 5, beginning with verse number 4. Remember that James has a whole lot to say about the abuses of the rich people against the poor. I don't know why it is that when people get on top, they want to pee on everybody who's down at the bottom. Get an amen here. Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. So there you have it. You have the Old Testament saying that we should treat folks fairly, and you have the New Testament demanding that we treat folks fairly. Actually, it's an imperative that people be paid a just wage for their work. You're not supposed to hold a man's check or hold my money. If I don't work for you, I'm through working. Give me my money so I can go down to the store. Never mind what I want to do with it. If you owe me, you do what? Pay me. I was talking with a politician the other week at a meeting, and I was discussing with him about the fact that we should seek redress from the veterans, from the FHA for the historic redlining and discrimination and segregation that the federal government imposed upon black people, not the nation, but upon all blacks, all the black citizens, from the Depression in 29 all the way through at least to 1970. Some say it ended in 1968, but it didn't really stop until what, 1970. And really that type of redlining continues on even today, because when you raise the cost of a house to $5 million, and you know I ain't got but $500, you already redlining me. You put me where I can't buy that house. I can't live in that neighborhood. I don't have the kind of money. And God don't like ugly. That's why when you see people's houses on fire up there in those forest-prone areas, and think about that. They went out there to get away from the other segment of the population. And so they are suffering the just due for that type of behavior. Isolating yourself, cutting yourself off from your fellow man, getting in league with the bears and the mountain lion rather than be around your own kind. Glory to God. We must redress these type of historic outcomes, these type of historic perspectives, to use kind language. And people feel guilty. Well, you should feel guilty. But it should not just be a matter of feeling guilt. You should do some remedy. Zacchaeus said to Jesus, if I have wronged any man, I'm going to restore unto him fourfold all that I have taken from him. And with all that has been taken away from black people in this nation, then that adage or that formula that algorithm where it applied would be very, very well received. And we ain't saying you got to pay us all at once, but you got to pay. And whether it come in the form of free health care, free medical care, free education, like you do for the Comanches and the other tribes of American Indian, Columbus Indians I call them, then that should be across the board to all black people. Should never have to pay for no medical care. Should never have to pay for this college education. You owe us. You owe the people. You got rich. The colleges got rich. The nation got rich. The banks got rich. The insurance companies got rich. Industry got rich. The railroad got rich off of the backs of the slave. Plantation owners, tobacco growers, cotton growers, and all the other industries, even to the building trades, got rich off the free labor of the black man here in America. Not the other folks, the black man. This conversation about minorities is an obfuscation of the historic wrongs and injustices that were heaped upon one group of people, and that was the African, brought against their will, kidnapped from their own countries and placed in the four holds of those slave ships, John Newton's ship included, the good ship Jesus included, and transported here against our will into this land. I disagree with the fact that we are all immigrants. We are not all immigrants. You might be an immigrant, but we are not all immigrants. And so that historic wrong that was committed, that transgression, cries out against us all the way to heaven. But God is merciful and not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. But when will this nation repent? When will America acknowledge the wrong that it has done to its citizens of black citizens? I have to get away from even using the term African, because you got so many people in Africa now who are not even black anymore. They're from Europe, and they've come over to that country and polluted the country and taken the wealth of that nation. The deeds to all of the wealth of Africa is in the vaults and in the castles and in the palaces in England, France, Italy, and the like. And so these things are the state of the world, and especially here in the land of the free and the home of the brave that talks about liberty and justice for all. It is time to begin to make amends, to make an atonement. Randall Robinson wrote a book years ago called The Debt. He says one of the points of reparation was to make the violated person whole again. If you rob somebody and the police catch you, you have to do restitution. And not just go to jail, but you have to they want you to do restitution. They want you to pay back to that person what you took from them. And remember the words of Abraham Lincoln in that second inaugural of 250 years of unrequited toil, all of the labor, all of the treasure piled up by the bondsman, 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and to every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid. Notice the word paid, not rewarded, paid, not recompense, paid by one drawn with the sword. And those were very, very stern and warlike words from such a gentle person as Monsieur Abraham Lincoln. But even he recognized the injustice that was being heaped upon the black man. Excuse me. And so, my brothers and my sisters, as we stand here in 2018 with the historic outcomes all the way from 16, 19 yet with us, what are we to do? It's written down, it's codified, it's recorded. The injustice of the housing administration. But then, like we said, we have historic outcomes like the redlining that made it possible for the predatory lenders to come into the black community and found vulnerable people who wanted to own houses, who wanted to get somewhere of their own, and then to give them a loan that was a subprime loan when they qualified for a regular loan. In other words, to deny to this part, one part of the citizenry, what was freely given to the other segment of society is injustice at its most cruel. Because when the housing crisis bubble burst, who was the one that lost so much of their wealth? Because most of your wealth is in your home. Whereas the wealth gap now is widening because the average white family has over $275,000 of wealth to pass on to their children, whereas the average black person has maybe $3,400 worth of inherited wealth to pass on to their loved ones. Why is that? Because of this housing condition, situation. You start out wrong, you're going to stay wrong all the way down the line. And so now, when you come back by denying people the right to get those loans back there, then it created the conditions that we now languish from Nicholson Gardens and Hawaiian Gardens and Jordan Downs and Pueblo del Rio and then Watts, and then we pressed into these what we call South Central Los Angeles, and we've had to try to make it there. And so many people, in order to find a place that they can afford that gives them some dignity. And Brother Johnny Morris just reminded me we had to go all the way out and live out there in the sandstorms and live out there in the cold of Lancaster. You get down to 16 degrees and 5 degrees in Lancaster, but the housing is cheap. It gets hot out there in the summertime. A dust storm. Never can keep the dust out your house in Lancaster and Palmdale. But what you gonna do? It's cheap out there. You over in Apple Valley, Antelope Valley, out there in all of that bad weather, but you can afford a house out there because thank God, at least you can afford to pay for a decent place to stay. And even that, as I said, is a historic outcome of the failure of this government to live up to its creed. We hold these truths that all men are created equal and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we had followed that goal, even coming up out of slavery, even coming up out of the war, out of World War I, America would have been a better place. But we failed to live up to it. Greed, prejudice, hatred, larceny, all of those concomitants led the group that was in power, which is still in power, the dominant society, to feel that they could safely defraud their brothers and their sisters who were black. And I don't believe that you can put the gays and the lesbian, what is all the lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and then the queer, and then you got another group who don't know what the world is. You can't put that group in there with the suffering that black people historically had, because you could be gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender or queer and be a slave master. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. You could be all of those things and still drive the bus, still run the train, still be on the police force. But you could not be black and be on the police force or drive the bus or drive the train, because it wasn't allowed. The common denominator was, if you were black, you were going to be discriminated against. You were denied the equal opportunity. You were denied the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As a matter of fact, the old adage, the old principle stated so beautifully, eloquently in the Declaration of Independence, which said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It said all men but black people. And so I do not hold that the people who are LGBT and all of the rest of that went through the same thing that black folk went through. But they didn't go through 250 years of slavery. They weren't snatched off of their homeland because they were queer. They were snatched off their homeland because they were black. I can't look at you and tell if you're funny. I can sure look at you and tell if you're black. And that is what I feel and I recognize, and the nation recognized, really, was the common denominator. When the Civil War was fought, Alexander Stephens said, we're not fighting because of no lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and all of that. We're fighting because we believe that the African race is an inferior subhuman race, and that the white man was created to dominate it, and the best thing for the African is to be under white domination, white superiority. All those doctrines of white supremacy, as Dr. King said, came about because of those type of misreadings of scripture, such about the curse of Ham and all of that foolishness. Those superstitions that were foisted upon the entire body politic. So many people were willing to imbibe that type of lie, those type of canards, those type of myths, legends, and fairy tales, like believing in Superman or Santa Claus. Once it gets started, you can't kill it. You're still talking about Santa Claus today. And we're still talking about race and racism today. Of course, we're going to be talking about racism because racism is the stepchild, if you will, of the theory, false though it may be, of race. Dr. King said there's no power like that of an idea whose time has come. And racism has been an idea that's been around with us now 500 years. Before Columbus discovered America. When the Pope sat down with the King of Spain and the King of Portugal, and they divided up the earth between them. Who told them to divide the earth like that? I do want to ask the question. But they divided the world between Spain and Portugal, and it was the Pope in Rome that was responsible for that. And so now we are living with the consequences of all of that false conception, false teaching, false ideology, false belief system, and some people are going to die and go to that grave believing in white supremacy. And thus, for you and for me, we have the legacy of these historic outcomes to contend with. And how are you going to contend with it if you don't know what's going on? That's the purpose of why we originally sent our children to school, to get them a good education. Emphasis should be on good, because if you teach them false history, then quite naturally they're not getting a good education. And I believe that we're going to have to do like the Jewish people did with their children. You go to the public schools and learn what they're teaching, and when you come home, you're going to learn our history, how it really was. And that way you will have a well-rounded and an honest and a truthful basis of facts upon which to base your education, which I had a witness. And thus, we continue to fight on against fighting upstream. It does appear, but we must fight on. We must never, as Churchill said, surrender on against racism. We must never capitulate to racism. We must steady preach the gospel that all men are created equal, that out of one blood God made all men for to dwell upon the face of this good ground, upon the face of this earth. Words to that effect. What are we going to do? We cannot go backwards and undo slavery. It's a fact. The wealth that was piled up, it's a fact. The injustice that was done to black people in this country is an established historic fact. So then what we do, we seek what? Redress. And I really don't see what the great problem is, because if you gave me $2 million or $4 million or $5 million, I wouldn't consider myself rich, but I'm going to spend it in the economy. So who benefits? Why, General Motors, Ford Motors, the housing industry, isn't that right? The entertainment industry going to benefit. The clothing industry going to benefit. It's going to go right back into the American system. So the only reason why that the reparations cannot or will not be paid is because of the larceny in the hearts of those who own or who are holding the wealth of this world. And let us not forget that the wealth gap is growing wider and the chasm is going deeper and deeper every year. Dr. Claude Anderson said, if you work on a job, you're never going to get rich working on no job. Well, I don't know. I know a certain person who was worked as a policeman, and then he was a police chief, and then he was on the city council, and he's pretty rich. He's done very, very well. And so there's no such thing as you can't get rich on a job. You just got to have a good job. See, man, lights and walls. And a whole lot of people that worked in the federal government and the state government and the county government and the city government have retired with great sums of pensions and income, benefits being paid. Some of them even get the pension and Social Security. And that's another thing. How come we got to fight, folks, for our Social Security check, for our Social Security benefit? How when I ask you for my Social Security money, you come telling me this lie about I'm asking you for welfare. I should be asking you for welfare, but I'm asking you for what I put into that Social Security Administration Fund. And that's what the social contract was, that when I retired, when we couldn't work no more, that we would have at least a little something coming in that would keep us from going into abject poverty. And we see, man, lights and wall. And so these things we must continue to address. We must continue to strive and fight for. I'm with the working man. I'm with the working woman, because it's the worker that built America, slave and free. It was the labor that built America, slave and free. And so if you work, you ought to get paid. Otherwise, you ain't got no business working. Start a business. Isn't that right? Because I'm too old to steal. And my mama taught me not to steal, although I have stolen a few things. But thanks be to the good Lord, He has blessed me. He have took care of me. But what about the bulk of the people who have not been, so blessed? And so we have to address the inherent inequities that affects all of us. Now, if you up there like Condoleezza Rice, quite naturally, you don't need no reparation. But you can't speak for me and tell me just because you don't need it, because you got all of this money coming in, that and wealth to pass on to your children, that I don't need it and I don't deserve it. I need it and I deserve it. I need to have something to pass on to my kids. See, man, lights and wall. We just can't live for ourselves. We got to leave something behind to pass on to somebody else. That's the nature of wealth. You ain't working to get rich. You're working to have something to pass on to your family, to your children, to your grandchildren. Look at all the massive amounts of wealth that these great titans of industry and leaders of heads of corporations are passing on, just piling it up for their children. Halliburton and all of that ilk. Let's not get off on Halliburton. What about Enron? And amen, man, just showed me I got 5 more minutes. But what about all of that wealth that's been piled up and piled up? Huh? They don't have to worry about their kids going to no college. They got the money. They don't have to worry about their kids getting something to eat. They got the money. Look at the Kardashians, all that crowd. I'm not against the Kardashians, don't get me wrong. I'm just using that as an example to show you the wealth that others are piling up. What is that lady's name? The Hilton. I remember Conrad Hilton Hotel downtown, all like that. Well, look at his kids now. They're what? The beneficiaries. And they inherited all of that wealth that Conrad Hilton and that crowd accumulated. Now they don't have to work. They ain't got to hit a lick at a snake. But I like my kids not to have hit a lick at a snake. Wouldn't you like your kids not to have to hit a lick at a snake? Went on and do something to benefit all mankind. Help humanity and all that type of thing. Don't be a fool like Donald Trump or some of these other entertainers and waste a fortune. I think I knew of a boxer who made $8 million when $8 million was a lot of money, and he's broke now. So you can be a fool with money, but if there's some money is that owed you, then you injustice and inequity and inequality must be what? Must be paid. Now you got to use some sense, true to that, when you got money. I don't know if I finished my thought about the politician I was talking to about redress from the FHA, and but that was the question he asked me: "What you gonna do with the money?" And the point is it's none of his business what I do with money. The point is the social justice issue and the equity issue and the equality issue. That if you owe me, you should do what? Pay me. God bless you, my brothers and my sisters. Let's keep fighting. Let's keep pressing on because it's time to get paid. All right. Talk at you next time.